You don't know anything.
If you've ever gotten into a debate with a friend about what's the best thing in a certain category, you know how heated it can get. But you already kind of know that you're not going to change your friend's mind about anything. It becomes more about convincing yourself that you've made a good choice. That's because we tend to feel like things we prefer are part of our identity. So if someone doesn't like something as much as we do, we take it personally and react emotionally instead of thinking rationally. That's why we need to keep our existing preferences in check as we set our fantasy football lineups. So let's take a look at one thing that creates our preferences in the first place: the mere exposure effect. It means that we like things simply because they're familiar. We haven't questioned them or compared them to anything else. After exposure, this sequence usually follows. We develop a preference, which becomes part of our identity, which leads to more emotional choices. You can come up with all sorts of detailed reasons to justify why you like your local team. But it usually comes down to these things. Your family has watched their games for your entire life. You hear about them all the time in the local media. And they play in a stadium near where you live, which is in the area that you want to believe is better than others. As you continue to be merely exposed to messages and experiences that reflect positively on your local team, you begin to prefer and identify with them, which puts you at risk of making emotional choices. You may be tempted to pick a lot of players from your local team and predict unreasonably high scores for them just because you hope they'll do well. Even though thinking rationally makes it more likely we'll win, we just don't like making the emotional effort of weighing the pros and cons of our choices, because it feels like it might threaten part of our identity. That's why it might help to keep these basic facts in mind about players on your local team. They didn't choose to be there. They were drafted and they're earning a high salary. And who knows if they'll be there next season. Also, watch out for the opposite situation: refusing to use certain players you hate, whether it's because you think they have obnoxious personalities or because they play for longtime rivals of your favorite team.
Can't touch me. Oh yeah.
Now, let's recap on how the mere exposure effect can form our fantasy football preferences. You get exposure to positive messages about your local team much more than any others. So you develop a preference for your local team. The team becomes part of your identity as time goes on, which brings emotion into any choice involving a player on that team. To avoid getting stuck on a hometown favorite, first, make a list of the criteria you'd want a player in your lineup to meet. Then, view the roster as if you've never heard of these players and see what comes closest to meeting your criteria. If there are multiple players who do, rank them. You'll be more likely to consider players who are less familiar to you. And you may become more open to playing guys you hate
Can't touch me.
if it looks like they'll improve your standings.
Oh yeah.
So, to make the best picks and predictions in fantasy football, bench the fan part of you for a little while and think like a general manager. Adopt an all-business mentality that leaves the emotions out of it.